Hello, it is Sunday, April 3rd, and welcome to Walking Between the Worlds. It has been a little bit longer than I anticipated before I'd get back with this installment, but after a little thinking, I decided that this installment of coincidence, synchronicity, and strange events, I'm just going to fill with a couple of little stories that have come from my own life because I have so many experiences like this. And then the next episode, I will get back to sharing stories from other people. So there are a couple of very interesting and peculiar events that have, for me, come surrounded with little plastic animals, right? I mean, it's strange. So you may know somebody that finds dimes, or somebody that sees hearts, or somebody that they get a memo because there's a crow in the tree. So sometimes the things that we are most aligned with are the things that show up for us as our road signs, as our markers, or as validation, or as a way of telling us to pay attention to something. Now, for me, when I was a kid, one of my very, very favorite things to do, probably the favorite thing to do, was to throw a sheet over a card table and go underneath it and hide from everybody, which was hard to do in a one-bedroom apartment that had 6 people and a cat in it, right? So my favorite spot under there, I would take my cigar box that had animals in it, little plastic animals, and I would play for hours and hours and create all kinds of scenarios. And I had barn animals and I had wild animals, so I did all kinds of things. But that was my respite. That was my meditation. It was the thing that I did to get myself into this space of being somewhere else and being very calm and very relaxed in my body, which didn't happen, frankly, very often as a kid because my household was pretty tumultuous. But having said that, I'm telling you this little tidbit because as an adult, these little plastic animals have turned up in different ways at peculiar times. So one incident was this. I was a young mother. I had both my girls. I had my younger daughter in my backpack and my older daughter by the hand, and we were walking to the grocery store. I had just woken up from a nap with them in which I'd had a dream that I went into their room, and hanging from their top bunk of their little bed, there was a green monkey. It was a live monkey, but it was green, and it was hanging on with one arm hanging over the bar. And in the dream, I didn't know at first it was a dream until the monkey moved, and I thought, there's no such thing as a green monkey. Aha, I'm in a dream. And then I woke up. So I was just thinking about that, like how sure I was that it wasn't a dream in the dream, and walking down the street to the grocery store with my girls, and we went in, and my older daughter wanted something out of the machine, where you put money in and they'd get a thing and a little plastic thing, like that. And there were rings and stars and all kinds of stuff in there. Anyway, I gave her a coin and she put it in and she turned it. And when she got it out and popped it open, she said, "Here, Mom, this is for you." And what do you think it was? Why? It was a little green monkey. And yes, I do still have it. So that was well, isn't that fascinating? So these are the kinds of things that, again, that you can't make this stuff up. And I'm not going to call it a coincidence because there are just too many of them. So another incident like that was many years later. I was on my way to visit my friend Whitley Strieber for the weekend. And I was at the airport early, wandering around. And I had I had about $22 in my bank account. And yet I was badly wanting a book to read, a new book to read. And so I wandered around and I found this book. And it was like $18, which for me at that time was a fortune, and especially since I only had, 20 something bucks in the account. But I bought it anyway. And I sat and I started reading, and I was fascinated. It was a marvelous book, and it was by Michael Talbot. All right, the book was by Michael Talbot, and it had to do with the universe and how the holographic universe was the title of the book, and it was wonderful and fascinating and really made me think. I was completely entranced by the book as I read, and my name got called. I went on the plane. I read the whole way there. I get off the plane. I have the book, with me in my pack, and I'm thinking, I'm going to tell Whitley that this is a fabulous book. So I get to his house, and he happens to have another guest there for the weekend, which was a common occurrence. He would have, a couple of people together at once. Well, who do you think it was? Yes, it was Michael Talbot. So the author of the book I had in my hand, and I was thrilled, and I was in awe, like this very interesting, strange occurrence. So we chatted. We talked about playing Risk. We talked about coffee, because he was a coffee lover. And long story short, there was that weekend and a different weekend where we ended up being invited at the same time and got to know each other a little bit. And I just thought he was a wonderful, wonderful human being. Anyway, he had an illness, and about a year and a half later, after those 2 weekends with him and visiting with him and getting to know him a little bit, I happened to be across town teaching a class at a community ed class. So it was at night. I was taking a break from the class. I went out and sat down in the little lunchroom area. It was in a high school, so in this little lunch area where there were machines and a couple of little tables, and there happened to be a New York Times laying open on the table that I sat at. And I pulled it over towards myself, and it was strangely opened. Not only was it a New York Times, here on the west side of Cleveland, but it was also open to the obituaries. And there was Michael's photograph and his obituary. He had just passed a few days before. And I thought, this is incredible. Like, how does this happen? And when I went home after that, I was still kind of I can't even tell you what the class was or how the second half went. But when I went home, I looked through my notes, my dream notes, because I generally keep a record of especially the, what I call big dreams. And I had thought that somewhere I had had a dream about him recently, and I did. I had a dream just 3 nights before that. And in that dream, I met him for coffee, and he said to me, I want you to let Whitley know that I'm okay. And I was just stunned. And anyway, then I called Whitley, I called my friend, and we talked about it, and he was very, very sad, and, how this brilliant person's life was cut short. And, I said, look, I had this dream, and he wants you to know he's okay. And again, just these incidents are not coincidence in the way that we think of them as being random occurrences. They're driven by some mechanism below the surface of our ordinary conscious daily awareness. And it doesn't mean that we can't tap into those places. It does mean that, navigating the world, we can't think of everything at once because we couldn't, tie our shoes and wash our dishes. But that doesn't mean that we don't have access to this information and these messages and these memos from the deeper part of our awareness, which I believe is connected to all awareness. I believe we can dip down into the underneath portion of our consciousness, and in our deep awareness that we can find the thread and the stream that takes us to any place in time, in the past, in the future, or to anyone we know, wherever they happen to be. And I didn't always think that. I've come to believe that because of so many experiences that have led me down that path of thinking. So here's one more of those incidents. the number of coincidences, if you want to call them that, synchronicities, are also just beyond something that I think I could make up if I were writing a fiction story. So I'd had, while I was reading through, I was actually looking, before I talked to you today, I was looking for a particular dream in an old dream journal. And I came across this time I had this very powerful dream about a stag in the woods. So I was standing in the forest in the dream, and there was an enormous stag, lots of points, big, beautiful animal, and it was snowing. It was gorgeous that it was snowing. It was just, a winter wonderland. And so I stood and looked at the deer, and the deer looked at me, and then I felt this communication, this energy from the deer, and it was, all I can tell you at the time was that it felt like I was given a gift. Don't know, don't understand it. And I woke up and I wrote it down because it felt so powerful. Okay, so that was the first event, and all of the other events are also written down because they happened so quickly after. So the next day after that dream, it's early in the morning, and I'm driving down to a coffee house where my younger daughter was working at the time. And right in the middle of the road, I mean, literally, not on the street, not crossing somebody's yard, but trotting along next to me in the road is a big antlered deer. And I just stopped my car and let him pass, and he turned his big old head and looked at me, and continued trotting down the middle of the road. Now, there was barely any traffic. It was very early in the morning. And yet, I'm like, when have you ever seen a deer trotting down the middle of the road? So, okay, so there was that. And then I went and I told my daughter, and had my coffee, and went later in the day, went grocery shopping, went up over the hill to a place I hadn't gone very often. And as I'm driving back, now at this point, the day is worn on. It's somewhere in the middle of the afternoon. It's after 2:00 in the afternoon. And I'm driving, and I'm heading in this direction, and I see that there's a big truck, and painted on the back of the truck, yes, is the big head of a deer, a big antlered deer. And as the truck pulls away and pulls in front of me and goes to go around the corner, I see another truck with a crane attached to it. And the crane is putting up a road sign, and the road sign says Crossroads Plaza. And so I don't know if you know anything about crossroads, right? But crossroads in mythical and magical traditions are places of change, and places of where power comes together, and places of decision, and places where the goddess of the crossroads, Hecate, resides. And so, again, I thought, this is extraordinary. This is so interesting and unusual. And that night, I had another dream in which there was another deer standing again. I'm sure, I imagine this was prompted by the deer that I saw going down the street, right? So I saw a deer in a yard, and I walked up to it. And there was a woman, an old woman with white hair, and she came sailing by on the wind, and her garment was pale blue and white, and she was kind of glowing, and she just said, pay attention to this. I sent this to you. And I thought, okay, I don't know what that means, but okay, I got it. Later on that afternoon, it was about 5:00 in the afternoon, and I was driving home from I don't remember where, and a deer, another big antlered deer in a different part of town, came bounding out from behind somebody's house, bounded right in front of my car. I wasn't going very fast. I stopped. It got to the sidewalk, turned again, looked at me, took a few steps in my direction, and then turned and very slowly trotted off as if to go between the houses. And just at that moment, a very old woman with white hair and a pale blue shirt that was blowing in the wind came riding down the street on her bicycle and said to me, "That was magnificent, wasn't it? Well, I hope it follows me home." And again, what do we make of these things? I mean, I could go on and tell you more stories about what I imagine it meant for me, but the important part, I think, is how many of those dear memos I got in such a short period of time. And it's not like I don't pay attention to animals that cross my path. It's not as if, it wasn't the you buy a Volkswagen so you see 20 of them thing, right? It wasn't that, because I pay pretty close attention to the animals in my environment, but the way in which it unfolded was extraordinary. So I'll give you one more. This is a bigger story. I'm not going to tell you the whole story right now. It's a story. It has to do with after I legally changed my name from Robin, which was my birth name, to Raven, because, well, I had always been more like a raven than a robin, and I had been using Raven as my pen name in writing articles for years at the time I changed it. But again, it started with a dream, and I wanted to change not just my first name, but my last name, because I was getting divorced. And I didn't want to go back to my maiden name, which was Robertson. I was born Robin Robertson. And so I was looking for just a name that struck me, that worked for me, that kind of went with Raven. And this was, well before computers and Google and all that sort of thing. So I was just playing with the idea of names. I stumbled upon, I thought, I like Dana. I know it's typically not a surname, but I just like it. And I went to the library to look it up, and I couldn't. The librarian told me that the book I needed was out, and she would let me know when it came back in. And I really wanted to know what it meant, but I thought, I'm just going to go ahead and do it anyway. Long story short, I had a dream, and in this dream, I walked up a flight of stairs that had been cordoned off by a velvet rope, and up the flight of stairs, I followed the sound of bagpipes into a closet. I opened the closet door, and there's a man in there, clearly from another time. His kilt is not what I remember the Robertson family kilt to be, which is reds and such. This one was kind of greens and had a stripe of yellow and a stripe of blue in it. And what I did while he was playing was I picked up the edge of the kilt and I looked at it very closely. For some reason, I felt it was important that I could remember what it looked like. And he told me in the music, he never stopped playing, but in my mind, I was told that I needed to reclaim or, recapture. I forget the word exactly that he used, but as to get my hereditary, my ancient name is what he said. I didn't know what it meant. But I thought, well, I've already picked a name. I'm just going to go with it and see what happens. All right, so I come back from that, wake up from that dream. A couple weeks go by. I go through the name change process, which actually ends up being very simple, uncomplicated, easy. And two things. So here's the tail end of the synchronicity. That a friend of mine said, "Oh, come, there's a new restaurant that's about to open, and that just opened rather, and let's go have a drink." So we go to this place that used to be an old house. I walk in, there's the flight of stairs, there's the velvet rope across the stairs. The upstairs is off limits. We go to the bar, and the guy says, "Oh yeah, our sign isn't finished yet, but welcome to the Raven's Nest." I thought, are you kidding me? Okay, so the Raven's Nest. In the meantime, I, have my drink. I'm thinking about, should I go upstairs, and I didn't. And I go home and get a call from the library that the book I had been looking for was in. And it's like, well, it's a day late and $1 short, but what the hell, I'll go anyway. So the following day, I made my way to the library, and she gave me the book. And the name as a surname, Dana, came from Danaan, Danan, or the Tuatha De Dana, the ancient Celtic people who came from the Danan or the Dana. And there was a goddess involved who appeared to her people in the form of ravens. You can't make this stuff up. So that got me thinking about that kilt. And I went back to the librarian and asked for some other material and dug through. And before I looked, just to be sure that I wasn't tricking myself, I wrote down a description of the kilt as I had remembered it from the dream. And then I started flipping through kilt patterns. And to my amazement, to my astonishment, I did find the pattern, and it was a Robertson pattern, but it was the warrior pattern rather than the regular family pattern that they wore on a day-to-day basis. And it was just, what does one make of that? Well, I don't know. I guess I picked the right name. That's what I made of that. So I've been Raven Dana for a very long time now, and the origins, the way that my name was given to me or chosen by me definitely has a lot of interesting twists and turns and synchronicities to it. So I just wanted to give you a little bit more about synchronicity and coincidence and strange occurrences. There are plenty of other stories out there, and I promise I'll come back and tell you more of other people's stories because they're rich and detailed and wonderful. And they're not all ambiguous the way sometimes mine end up being kind of ambiguous. Sometimes they really do have a very specific point or a piece of information or a warning, and I'll share with you some of those. Thank you so much for being with me today. I hope you enjoyed this little episode of Strange Occurrences. And I'll be back again at least once a week. I'll come and post one little chapter of information and then on a separate chat, a meditation. But I do want you to know that I'm going to have a class coming up, and I will post a separate video that's just about the class, and it's going to be about trees and all kinds of things about trees, the spirituality of trees, the sentience of trees, some actual science about trees. So if you love trees, if you're connected to trees, you won't want to miss this. It's going to be a series. And like I said, in a couple days, I'm going to post a separate video that's just about the class, so you can look for it. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you have a story that you'd like to share, I'd love to hear it. One of the reasons why I created this channel was so that I could find other interesting, intelligent, grounded, like-minded people to have fun exchanges with and to listen to their stories and not just tell my own. And like I said, I have plenty of other people's stories as well. But I'm very interested in hearing from you. So if you have a question or you'd like me to cover a certain topic, or if you have a story that you'd like to share, then please reach out to me. Again, Raven Dana, and you can find me ravendana55@gmail.com. Thank you so much, and have a lovely evening.